Yoshihiro Togashi has done it again. Hunter x Hunter has gone from standard shonen to battle tournament to revenge story to card game to ants to politics to more politics, and now we're going all the way back to card game. So this chapter has been met with some mixed reactions based on what I've seen. And if you're one of those people who wasn't thrilled by this, then please let me change your mind. Because this chapter has all but convinced me that Morena is the primary antagonist of the Succession Contest arc, which is not a title easily claimed in the company of Saragnik, Beyond Netro, and even Crawler. And also, just a quick thing, while I was searching for Morena reference images as a result of this chapter, I stumbled upon what I think is the world's first Morena cosplay by Gracious Bloom, and I am beyond thrilled that this character is finally starting to get the attention that she will go on to command from here on out. Let's get into it though. So this chapter, it begins with Hawkenberg's funeral procession, and it's happening at 1 p.m. on day 12 of the journey. Those numbers are important. Very important, because we've now jumped forward in time quite a bit, and we should definitely expect to jump back at some stage. Because what we're seeing is happening at 1 p.m, but Kurapika's second round of Nen lessons was scheduled to begin at 9 a.m. today, meaning that that's already been happening for 4 hours, and while we're seeing the events of this chapter, who knows what insanity has happened within that time with Silent Majority and Camilla's representative. And before we move on to the main event of this chapter, I just wanted to highlight something that I didn't notice before about the funeral procession, which is the absolute golden opportunity that this could have been for the Hali, because the 12 people carrying Hawkenberg's coffin are all Nen users that were awoken by his guardian spirit beast. And according to the rules of contagion, killing a Nen user gives you 10 levels, so there is a whopping 120 levels just sitting here waiting to be claimed, which Dogman would realize if he got close enough, as he has the ability to smell Nen users. I'm not sure if that's how things are going to turn out though, because the way that this chapter is presented to us is as if the funeral went off without a hitch. Nobody ruined anything, because we cut to Saragnik's childhood soldier friends talking about how it happened 30 minutes ago, or at the very least the procession passed them 30 minutes ago. Actually, not even that, the procession passed Borkson 30 minutes ago. But what's happened here is the plan that was being spoken about during chapter 405, the combination of Dogman and Sodom, who we now know were sent to find Borkson, or a Borkson-esque person. This whole thing was slightly confusing because Dogman's ability, as stated before, is to be able to sniff out whether or not someone knows Nen, which made a lot of people think that Morena's target was a Nen user. However, I imagine that those same people missed the rather vague explanation of Sodom's ability, which is that he can abduct people, but only if they don't know Nen. So long story less long, Dogman was probably only sent to make sure that Borkson didn't know Nen before Sodom abducted her, but also another thing that we'll speak about in a bit. And if I had to guess, I would say there would be a punishment if Sodom did abduct a Nen user, if indeed it's even possible to begin with. But I'm tempted to say that it is, just because it would add a bit, a bit more risk to the ability, and thus make it a bit more powersome. But we should talk about our abductee in question. Her name is Borkson. There's a lot of people who don't remember her, and I don't blame them. She is a very recent addition to the cast. However, she has been around ever since the departure of the Black Whale one, because there's been some recent manga flashback panels that retroactively insert her into scenes that she wasn't originally drawn in. But Borkson is, firstly, a genuine name that I used to call my dog long before she was a Hunter x Hunter character, and as a result, it's very difficult for me to take her seriously at times, because all I can think of is the most adorable Borkson in the world right here. It also really doesn't help that she gets called Bork for short. However, Borkson is a private first class of the Kakian Royal Army, and we were first introduced to her in chapter 394, where it's implied that she may have been one of 4th Prince Saragnik's childhood friends. It's a bit hard to tell because she doesn't call him Seri like the other 5 friends do, she refers to him as the Prince, but they all act like they're part of the same group, so I guess it's possible. And Borkson is also very familiar with Theta. I don't know if I would use the word friend, but Borkson knows enough about Theta to know that something has been very off with her ever since Saragnik heard about the concept of Nen. In fact, even though we don't see her, we do learn that Borkson was present in chapter 362, which was when Saragnik first learned about the Nen, and Borkson notes that ever since that moment, both Theta and Salkov have been acting real weird. And we know that's because Theta and Salkov are existing Nen users, and they know just how dangerous it would be for Saragnik to have access to this power that they are now facilitating him to achieve. But what's important to note here is that Borkson herself is not a Nen user. And look, that should be obvious because of Sodom's ability, but it does get a bit confusing because she is taking this whole situation rather well, as if she was an experienced Nen user, but she's also a hunter, specifically a provisional hunter. But then again, in the Succession Contest, who isn't? Chairman Cheadle modified the hunter exam and even the hunter bylaws for the sake of the this Dark Continent voyage in order to boost their forces for the expedition, not knowing that this fiendish succession contest would be taking place. So a whole ton of people on this ship are provisional hunters, and their licenses will expire after the expedition concludes, if it concludes. I mean, if it doesn't, I guess one way or the other something is expiring. And this whole Morena situation doesn't come completely out of nowhere, because Boxen's introduction with Srydnik's friends is a discussion about Morena and her plans, which featured the statement that in order to protect their own lives, they would avoid Morena at all costs. And well, that doesn't seem to have worked. Luckily, Momoli, one of the named friends, suggested that they probably need some sort of plan in case one of them does get captured, after which point Boxen agreed, and in this chapter, it appears that the plan that they settled on was to do nothing at all. At the moment, the idea is to avoid all contact with Morena, no negotiations and no rescue attempts. And little did they know how important the negotiations clause of that plan would be, but it's not completely off the table for the 5 soldier friends to mount a rescue attempt for Boxen. They're gonna discuss it amongst themselves once they're off duty, but I would say that that's probably a very, very bad idea, because none of them are Nen users, and they would be walking straight into the Hali meat grinder, just 5 free levels gifted to them on a silver platter. Now the big question is, if I'm Morena, why Boxen? Of everyone on the ship, I would not have thought that she was gonna be the nexus of Morena's plot. But from what we can gather, Boxen is not only extremely important to Morena's plans, but practically integral, as she has repeatedly stated to Dogman that he has the most important of dog jobs, which is that he needed to find what Morena was looking for, which appears to be Boxen herself. So one idea that I don't think I subscribe to is that Boxen could be used in an attempt to assassinate Srydnik, because she is rather trusted by him, a pretty amazing feat for a woman, by the way. He doesn't trust those very easily at all. And she also has the highest authority within Srydnik's childhood friend group, if she was part of it. Again, vague. I can't imagine it being that simple though. If Morena just wanted to kill Srydnik, which she doesn't, she wants to kill everyone, but if she was focused on just him, then there would surely be a less convoluted way. Although it is a pretty appealing idea because he is a prince, and according to Contagion, if a Hali member kills a prince, and they gain an instant 50 levels, so if Boxen does join and carries out something like this, then she would become an automatic level 50 and develop an instant Hatsu of her own. I do also wonder how that would function with Parallel Future, because Theta did technically kill Srydnik in the quote real world before the Srydnik that existed in the parallel world changed that. So maybe there's a bit of a loophole here where we could farm Srydnik for levels, but we're getting way ahead of ourselves though, because I think that this could have to do with Dogman's sub-ability, which is to sniff out Nen affinities, which should work even if his target doesn't know Nen yet, because the affinity is whatever you're born with. You cannot mask that stink. So Boxen may not have been specifically mentioned as the target. In fact, I doubt she was, but perhaps she had the scent of a natural specialist or a different Nen affinity that the Hali are currently lacking. Right now, what they have is that they have a lot of emitters, enhancers, and conjurers. One of the family members, I think it was Gelato actually, who's currently here in this room, she made a comment saying that, oh, all of these conjurers seem to be left-handed, implying that there's a whole ton of conjurers within the Hali family for her to have made that connection. And I've gone over all the members we know of, and in the group there are only 2 transmuters and 1 manipulator. So the Hali are quite lacking in those affinities, but as I said before, they could also be hunting for a specialist, because they currently have 0 of those, which makes so much sense. That's why Morena chose Hawkenberg's funeral, because there's so many people there. One of them has to be a specialist, right? In which case, Boxen's connection to Srydnik could be completely coincidental. But Boxen is in a rather rough situation because she has woken up engaged in a Nen ability. Before I get too deeply into the cards and everything, I want to note the other Hali members that are present because they are very important. The one of immediate note is Yokotani. He's here as head of security, as his Battle of Wits ability can forcibly restrain and eject anyone who breaks the laws of the Hali hideout. So if Boxen does do something out of line, which I don't think she can because then she'll break the ability and be cursed to only answer yes or no to do anything. So if Boxen did manage to do something out of line, then we have both the police and the judge ready to intervene. I don't think Boxen would be the problem though. I think Yokotani's more here in case something from the outside tries to make its way in. But also standing by Morena's side is Viconte. I don't know what level he currently is, but the last time we saw him, he was a level 26 emitter, and his ability was the one responsible for teleporting people from the tier 3 room to the Hali hideout. This is how Nobunaga and Henry managed to infiltrate before they were ejected. They used Viconte's ability, and this was probably also how Sodom delivered Boxen to the hideout, because Sodom is a manipulator, so he can't do the teleporty thing. But Viconte here, he could be another safety measure. If something goes horribly wrong, having this dude who can place teleporting land landmines, seems pretty handy. But on Morena's other side is Gelato, who I mentioned before. And the last time we saw her, she was a level 19, meaning that she had not yet developed her own personal Nen ability because they manifest at level 20. But I do have to imagine that Gelato has one of her own by now, if only because so many other members of the Hali family have drastically leveled up since the last time we saw them, which according to the timeline is quite startling because that was early this morning. To put that into perspective, Dogman has killed about 30 people to get to his current level just in this morning. The dude has been busy. And just as a little fun fact, Gelato and every female member of the Hali family so far, bar Morena, are named after delicious desserts. But also in the room is a strange man named Orage. He was a level 21 enhancer, and we didn't see any special ability from him, but he's already a skilled enough enhancer to block a knife with an enhanced copy of Weekly Shonen Jump, which notably features One Piece on the cover. And as for our final member in this room, I would love to tell you something about her, but at this stage we don't know her level, we don't know her Nen affinity, and we don't even know her name. She's the only unnamed member of the Hali family, and the collector's instinct within me desperately wants to change that. But all of this is to say that Morena hasn't just gathered 5 people who currently have nothing better to do to watch her play a card game. The Nen abilities that we do know of are heavily defense focused, so I imagine that everyone in this room serves an integral role should anything get out of hand. Which it very well could, because as we go into this card game, we should always remember that Finks and Phaeton are currently on their way to the Hali hideout thanks to Henry's transmitter, and their presence could interrupt this game at any given point, which from what we know of it so far would be bad for everyone involved. Alright, so let's do this now. Let's get into the negotiation game. The response to this chapter, as I said before, seems to have been a bit mixed. However, the moment that I saw Morena whip out a deck of cards, I was 100% on board. I am a huge fan of rectangular cardboard. I used to be quite heavily into Magic, and slightly more recently even the Pokemon TCG, which is a surprisingly solid game. And I love everything about what's happening here, because what this appears to be is very basic manipulation with a ton of extra steps. Don't let characters like Illumi and Shalnark fool you. Manipulation is very difficult to achieve. The cost of having someone give up their free will is enormous. Most Nen users cannot meet it, at least not simply. And the idea behind this game appears to be that Morena gets to make a request and Borkson is forced to respond to it, with that answer becoming a binding result of what I assume is manipulation. Whatever answer Borkson ends up with, whatever her final card is, she is locked in. And that's terrifying because we don't know what the request is yet. So how can we figure out what we want our answer to be? Borkson has a bunch of options, a yes, a no, a joker, which can be either yes or no, as well as the Twitter logo, which is neither a yes or a no. It's more of an I shall abstain, in addition to an R card, which allows Borkson to return a discarded answer to her hand. So currently, all of this is meaningless because we haven't started playing yet, but this is where the beauty of the game comes in. At first, the odds seem stacked in Morena's favor. That's what Borkson says. That's what a lot of people seem to believe. But this game is actually more like solitaire because it appears that Borkson has almost sole agency within the game. Morena's cards are face up, so Borkson is always working with perfect information. Borkson also negotiated that she'd be the one to select which of her face down cards get discarded. So if Borkson can figure out what they are, then that is a huge advantage. But also Morena cannot lie at any point during this game, which is assumedly a restriction of her ability. And I am thinking that this is Morena's ability. It could belong to one of the other unknown Hali family members around her, but here's my thinking right. Morena already has Contagion. However, Morena herself is a player in the Contagion game. We don't know her current level, but when it was last stated, she was a level 45, which theoretically means that when she hit level 20, she was granted a new Nen ability, which is potentially this set of cards. But I don't think that Borkson is at as much of a disadvantage as she initially believed, and this ability does seem quite balanced from what we've heard of it. Like most things with Nen, it really does depend on what you make of it and how clever you are in figuring it out. So the only thing that Morena has any real agency over is the request itself, and after that, it's all in Borkson's hands. However, there is the problem of time. The longer this game goes on, the worse the outcome becomes for both of them, according to Morena. We don't know what that means yet, but finding the answer to this is as easy as Borkson selecting the power card and having Morena explain this ability in detail to her. The problem there being that the explanation takes time as well, and Borkson not a Nen user. So it's a lot to take in, and she's potentially not capable of complete comprehension at this stage. But as Borkson notes, this game also functions as a job interview, which is a pretty horrifying prospect. Because if this is what Morena used to recruit the other members of the Hali family, then they have been severely underestimated, and if they manage to satisfy Morena's test, then they should all be capable of pretty solid intelligence despite what we've seen of them so far. which is not that. But let's say that boxing gets a bad ending with this game. In that case, what I would love to see next is for somehow Morena to have a negotiation with Kurapika. He's the kind of person who would do extremely well in something like this, or Crawler. I'd just love to see one of the masterminds of Hunter x Hunter tackle this format. And honestly, I'd even love to give the game a go myself under non-Nen based conditions, because it does seem like a great way to conduct social interaction. No vagaries, just very straightforward rules and choices. One other very interesting thing is that Morena, she looks quite pleasant in this chapter, doesn't she? This is probably the least intimidating and most generally lovely she's ever appeared, and Borkson doesn't buy it for a second. Even though she can't see Aura, Borkson can feel Morena's anger consuming her, which is another point of curiosity and could lead to Borkson selecting the motivation card, or even the basic question cards to try and understand more about Morena and why she's so angry. As a side note, this could also be how Morena has recruited Kenny Wang to work for her, abducting him, forcing him to play the game, and now he's performing whatever her request was. And who knows, there could be many others. There's even a theory that Kaiser is currently under Morena's control as well, which we should go into at some point. All in all, I am a big fan of this chapter though, because my belief has always been that Hunter x Hunter is a micro manga. What I mean by that is that it's at its absolute peak in situations like this, where we really put two characters under a microscope within a strict set of rules and watch how they interact. As opposed to something like One Piece, which I describe as a macro manga. Oda is the king of world building and overarching stories, but Togashi is the king of what's happening right here, right now. And I absolutely cannot wait to see how this negotiation game plays out. And if you think you know what Morena's request may be, then leave it in the comments, because I'm very curious.